My daughter-in-law Jessica smiled sweetly as she gestured toward the cold, concrete space where my bed now sat between lawn mowers and storage boxes. What she didn't know was that by tomorrow evening, she'd be desperately calling me, begging, to know why the "for sale, sold" sign had appeared on the front lawn of what she thought was her dream home. Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and ultimate justice, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe so you never miss stories like this one. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this unfolds when someone pushes the wrong 70-year-old woman too far. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 70 years old, and this story begins 18 months ago when I made what I thought was a generous decision to help my struggling son and his family. A decision that would teach me the hardest lesson of my life about the difference between being kind and being foolish. But to understand how I ended up sleeping in a garage before becoming the most powerful person in my family's life, you need to know who I was before I let my maternal instincts override my business sense. For 42 years, I was Eleanor Whitmore, successful real estate developer and property investor in Charleston, South Carolina. I didn't just sell houses, I built communities. My company, Whitmore Properties, had developed 12 residential neighborhoods, 3 commercial complexes, and a luxury retirement community that became the gold standard for senior living in the Southeast. I started with nothing but a real estate license and a $5,000 loan from my late husband Robert's life insurance policy when he passed away at 38 from a sudden heart attack, leaving me with a 2-year-old son and a mountain of grief. But grief, I learned, could be transformed into determination. My first property was a rundown duplex in North Charleston that nobody else wanted to touch. The previous owner had abandoned it after a fire damaged half the structure, and it had been sitting empty for 3 years. I bought it for $18,000, spent another $15,000 renovating it myself. I learned plumbing, electrical work, and tile installation from YouTube videos and library books, and rented both units for enough to cover my mortgage and put food on the table. That duplex taught me everything I needed to know about real estate. Location matters, but vision matters more. Everyone saw a fire-damaged eyesore. I saw 2 families who needed affordable housing and a property that could generate steady income with the right improvements. By the time Thomas graduated from high school, I owned 17 rental properties across Charleston County. By the time he graduated from college, I had developed my first subdivision, Magnolia Gardens, a 47-home community that sold out before construction was completed. But I didn't stop there. I studied the market, learned about zoning laws, built relationships with city planners and contractors, and slowly expanded from residential rentals to commercial development. When big box stores wanted to build in Charleston, they came to me for land. When the city needed affordable housing solutions, they consulted with me on development strategies. I wasn't just buying and selling properties, I was shaping the growth of Charleston. The Whitmore Commons Shopping Center anchored the revival of West Ashley. The Whitmore Senior Living Community set the standard for luxury retirement housing in the Low Country. The Whitmore Industrial Park brought manufacturing jobs to North Charleston and helped revitalize an economically depressed area. By my 60th birthday, I was regularly featured in Charleston Business Journal as one of the most influential developers in the region. The mayor invited me to serve on the city's Economic Development Advisory Board. The Chamber of Commerce gave me their Lifetime Achievement Award for contributions to Charleston's growth and prosperity. I had built something that went far beyond personal wealth. I had created a legacy of community development and responsible growth that would benefit Charleston for generations. But success in business didn't mean I neglected my personal life. After Robert's death, I had focused entirely on building security for Thomas and myself. But as my business grew and stabilized, I began to enjoy the fruits of my labor. I traveled extensively, often combining business trips with personal exploration. I spent a month in Tuscany studying Italian architecture and viticulture, which inspired the design elements I incorporated into Magnolia Gardens. I toured sustainable communities in Denmark and Germany, bringing back ideas that made the Whitmore Senior Living community a model for environmentally conscious development. I collected art from local Charleston artists, supporting the cultural community that made our city unique. My home became a gathering place for charity fundraisers, political discussions, and cultural events. I hosted the annual Charleston Preservation Society Gala for 12 consecutive years, raising over $2 million for historic preservation projects. I was actively involved in Thomas's life throughout his childhood and young adulthood, attending every school play, soccer game, and graduation ceremony. I paid for his education at the College of Charleston, where he studied business administration, and I was proud when he graduated with honors. When he married Jessica 8 years ago, I welcomed her into our family with genuine warmth. I paid for their wedding, a $45,000 affair at the Ocean House on Kiowa Island that Jessica had dreamed of since childhood. When the twins were born, I was in the delivery room, and I've been an active grandmother ever since. I thought I was building something beautiful, a successful business, a strong family, a meaningful legacy. What I didn't realize was that my success would eventually become a source of resentment rather than pride for the people I loved most. Thomas had always been, well, let's call him creatively ambitious. As a child, he was constantly starting projects, building elaborate forts, creating neighborhood newspapers, organizing complicated games that required dozens of participants and complex rules. I admired his creativity and entrepreneurial spirit, even when most of his ventures ended in chaos. In high school, he started a lawn care business that lasted one summer before he decided physical labor wasn't his calling. In college, he launched a campus food delivery service that failed when he realized he'd have to work nights and weekends. After graduation, he tried real estate sales, but he lacked the patience for the long relationship-building process that successful agents require. Each failure was explained by circumstances beyond his control. The lawn care business failed because clients didn't appreciate quality work. The food delivery service failed because college students are unreliable customers. Real estate didn't work because the market was changing too rapidly for traditional sales approaches. I supported him through each venture, both emotionally and financially. I believed that entrepreneurship required experimentation, that failure was part of learning, and that eventually he would find his niche. I also believed that having a safety net would give him the confidence to take risks and innovate. Looking back, I realize I may have created the opposite effect. By cushioning every failure, I may have prevented him from learning the hard lessons that build character and resilience. When Thomas met Jessica, I was hopeful that marriage would provide the stability and motivation he seemed to need. Jessica was smart, organized, and ambitious. She had a marketing degree from USC and had worked for several Charleston companies in increasingly responsible positions. She seemed like the perfect partner to balance Thomas's creativity with practical business sense. Their early years together were promising. Jessica encouraged Thomas to pursue more structured opportunities, and she helped him develop business plans and marketing strategies for his various ventures. When the twins were born, they both embraced parenthood with enthusiasm and dedication. But somewhere along the way, things began to shift. Jessica had grown up in a middle-class family in Colombia, but she had always dreamed of a more luxurious lifestyle. Social media became her window into a world of designer clothes, exotic vacations, and perfectly curated homes, and she began to see her current circumstances as temporary stepping stones rather than achievements to be grateful for. She started a family lifestyle blog called Charleston Charm, documenting their daily lives with carefully staged photographs and aspirational content. The blog became her full-time occupation, though it generated very little income. Instead of earning money, it seemed to create an endless appetite for spending on props, outfits, and experiences that would photograph well. Thomas, meanwhile, had discovered cryptocurrency and day trading. He spent hours analyzing market trends and following online gurus who promised quick wealth through smart investments. He convinced himself that traditional business models were obsolete, that the future belonged to people who understood digital currencies and online trading strategies. The combination of Jessica's lifestyle aspirations and Thomas's get-rich-quick schemes created a perfect storm of financial pressure. They needed money to maintain the image Jessica was projecting, and they needed constant new investments to fund Thomas's trading activities. Their requests for help became more frequent and more substantial. A few $100s for a family photo session became a few thousand for a family vacation that would provide content for Jessica's blog. A small loan for Thomas's investment opportunity became a larger loan to cover the losses when the investment failed. I helped because I could afford to, and because I believed I was supporting their efforts to build stability and success. I also helped because despite my business acumen, I had a blind spot when it came to my family. I wanted them to be happy, and I wanted to be generous with the wealth I had worked so hard to accumulate. The crisis that led to their eventual move into my house began with what Thomas called a temporary cash flow issue, but was actually a fundamental mismatch between their income and expenses. Thomas's day trading had resulted in significant losses, money. He had borrowed against their credit cards and home equity line of credit. Jessica's blog required constant investment in new content, clothes, and activities, but generated virtually no revenue. The twins' private school tuition was $24,000 per year. Their club sports fees were another $8,000 annually, and their mortgage and living expenses in a trendy Charleston neighborhood were stretching their budget beyond breaking point. When Thomas came to me in early 2023, explaining that they were facing foreclosure on their townhouse, I was shocked. I had been helping them with smaller amounts regularly, but I hadn't realized the extent of their financial problems. "Mom, I need to ask for something big," Thomas said during one of our Sunday dinners. "We're in real trouble." He explained that they owed $47,000 in credit card debt, were 3 months behind on their mortgage, and had maxed out their home equity line of credit. The bank had started foreclosure proceedings, and they had 30 days to bring their payments current or lose the house. Jessica sat beside him, tears streaming down her face. "Eleanor, we've tried everything. I've been looking for work, but my skills are outdated after being out of the workforce for so long. Thomas has been pursuing several business opportunities, but everything takes time to develop." "We don't want to ask you for money again," Thomas said. "We know how much you've already done for us. But we're desperate. If we lose the house, we don't know where we'll go." The amount they needed, $47,000 plus enough to cover their monthly expenses while they got back on their feet, was substantial even for me. But more concerning than the money was the pattern I was beginning to recognize. This wasn't a temporary crisis. It was the inevitable result of systematic overspending and poor financial decision-making. I agreed to help them avoid foreclosure, but I insisted on conditions. They needed to create a realistic budget, eliminate unnecessary expenses, and develop a concrete plan for increasing their income. Thomas needed to find stable employment instead of chasing investment opportunities, and Jessica needed to either monetize her blog effectively or find traditional employment. They agreed to everything I suggested, expressed profound gratitude for my help, and promised that this would be the last time they needed to ask for financial assistance. Within 6 months, they were back in crisis mode. When Thomas and Jessica approached me about living together, it seemed like a solution that could benefit everyone. They needed stable housing and lower living expenses. I could use help maintaining my large property and would enjoy having family close by. The twins would benefit from living in an excellent school district and having daily access to their grandmother. The conversation about their moving in was carefully orchestrated, though I didn't recognize the manipulation at the time. "Mom, we need to have a serious conversation," Thomas said during one of our weekly Sunday dinners at my house. Jessica, sat beside him, holding his hand in what I would later recognize as a carefully rehearsed presentation. Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind? It's about your living situation, Jessica said, her voice full of what seemed like genuine concern. This house is enormous for one person, and frankly, we're worried about you living alone at your age. I felt my spine stiffen slightly. I'm 70, not 90, and I'm perfectly capable of managing my own home. Of course you are, Thomas said quickly. But Mom, think about it practically. You're rattling around in this huge house all by yourself. What if something happens? What if you fall, or have a medical emergency? What if you get lonely? Jessica leaned forward, her expression earnest and caring. Eleanor, we've been talking, and we think it would be wonderful if you came to live with us. We could be a real family unit, helping each other, supporting each other. The suggestion caught me completely off guard. Live with you? In your townhouse? Well, that's the thing, Thomas said, and I caught the first hint of excitement in his voice. Our lease is up next month, and instead of renewing, we were thinking, what if we all live together here, in your house? Jessica jumped in smoothly. It would be perfect, Eleanor. You'd have constant companionship. We'd be here to help with anything you need, and Madison and Mason would get to spend real time with their grandmother. Plus, we could help with the maintenance and upkeep of this big house. They painted a compelling picture. I would have live-in help with household maintenance, daily companionship, and the joy of watching my grandchildren grow up in the same house where I had raised their father. They would have stable housing, excellent schools for the children, and the opportunity to save money while rebuilding their financial situation. What about household expenses? I asked. Utilities, groceries, maintenance. How would we handle all that? We'd contribute what we can, Thomas said. Obviously, we can't match what you're used to spending, but we'd pay for groceries, help with utilities, and I'd take care of yard work and basic maintenance. And I could help with cooking, cleaning, organizing, Jessica added. I love managing households, and it would be wonderful to put those skills to use helping family. The arrangement sounded reasonable and mutually beneficial. What they didn't mention, and what I failed to ask about, were the crucial details about decision-making authority, privacy boundaries, and long-term expectations. When Thomas and Jessica moved into my house in September 2023, it felt like the beginning of a beautiful new chapter in our family's story. The twins were excited about their new rooms, the large yard, and being so close to their grandmother. Thomas seemed motivated to find stable employment now that housing pressure was reduced. Jessica was enthusiastic about contributing to household management and excited about the potential for her blog in such a beautiful setting. The first few months were everything I had hoped for. Madison and Mason adapted quickly to their new school and made friends in the neighborhood. I enjoyed having dinner companions every evening and helping with homework and school projects. Jessica was indeed helpful with household tasks, and Thomas took over yard maintenance and minor repairs. We established routines that seemed to work for everyone. I continued to use my home office for managing my business affairs and property investments. Thomas set up a workspace in the guest house where he could pursue job searching and business development. Jessica used the sunroom for her blog photography and content creation. The twins had plenty of space for homework, play, and entertaining friends. For the first time since Robert's death, my house felt truly alive again. There were children's voices in the hallways, family dinners around the big dining room table, and the constant activity of a busy household. I thought I was witnessing the successful blending of two generations into a harmonious family unit. What I was actually witnessing was the beginning of a systematic takeover that would gradually strip away my authority, privacy, and dignity in my own home. The changes began so gradually that I didn't recognize them as a pattern. Jessica would make small suggestions about household arrangements, moving furniture to improve traffic flow, rearranging kitchen cabinets for better organization, changing dinner routines to accommodate everyone's schedules. Each suggestion made sense individually and was presented as being for my convenience or benefit. Moving the antique secretary desk from the living room to my bedroom would give the children more space to play, while providing me with a more private workspace. Rearranging the kitchen would make cooking more efficient and help Jessica contribute more effectively to meal preparation. I agreed to these changes because they seemed reasonable, and because I wanted to be accommodating to family members who were adjusting to a new living situation. I also agreed because Jessica presented each suggestion as a way to make my life easier, rather than as imposing her preferences on my home. But cumulatively, these small changes began to transform my house from a space that reflected my personality and preferences into a space that accommodated Jessica's vision of family living. The formal dining room, where I had entertained clients and hosted charity events for decades, became the twins' homework and art project space. The living room, with its carefully arranged antique furniture and art collection, became a casual, family room with child-friendly furniture and electronics. My home office was relocated to a smaller room to make space for Thomas's business development activities. More concerning than the physical changes were the subtle shifts in household decision-making. Jessica began making unilateral decisions about grocery shopping, meal planning, and daily schedules, always framing these decisions as helping Eleanor by taking things off her plate. When I expressed interest in hosting my annual charity fundraiser at the house, Jessica gently suggested that it might be too much stress for me and too disruptive for the children's school routine. When I wanted to hire a cleaning service, as I had for years, Jessica insisted that she could handle the cleaning and that paid help would be an unnecessary expense. Each individual decision seemed reasonable, but together they created a pattern where my preferences and routines were gradually being replaced by arrangements that served the family's convenience rather than my comfort. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of the evolving living arrangement was the gradual shift in financial expectations. Initially, Thomas and Jessica had promised to contribute to household expenses according to their means. In practice, their contributions became smaller and less regular, while their expectations of my financial support grew larger and more assumption-based. Thomas's job search seemed to consistently yield opportunities that were almost perfect, but required just a bit more time or investment to develop. Jessica's blog required constant investment in new equipment, software, and marketing strategies that would definitely start generating income soon. Meanwhile, household expenses that I had always managed were now being treated as shared family costs that naturally fell to me as the person with the most resources. Private school tuition for the twins became my responsibility because I had so much more space in my budget. Vacations became family experiences that I was expected to fund because I loved spending time with the grandchildren. The twins' extracurricular activities, expensive club sports, music lessons, summer camps, were presented as educational investments that I should want to support as their grandmother. Jessica's wardrobe updates were necessary for her business development activities. Thomas's training courses and certification programs were investments in our family's future financial stability. None of these expenses were explicitly demanded, but they were presented in ways that made refusal seem selfish or short-sighted. I was made to feel that questioning these costs meant I didn't care about my grandchildren's opportunities or my son's career development. By the end of their first year living with me, I was covering virtually all household expenses plus funding, lifestyle and activity costs that exceeded what I had spent when living alone by more than $60,000 annually. The most insidious change was the gradual erosion of my authority in my own home. Decisions that had always been mine to make, what to have for dinner, what temperature to keep the house, what television shows to watch in the living room, became group decisions where I was outvoted by the family of 4. When I wanted to host book club meetings, Jessica suggested that having outsiders in the house regularly made the children uncomfortable. When I wanted to redecorate the guest bathroom, Thomas pointed out that any improvements would benefit the whole family and should reflect everyone's preferences. My daily routines, morning coffee on the garden terrace, evening reading in the living room, weekend visits from friends, were gradually modified to accommodate family schedules and activities. I found myself asking permission to use rooms in my own house or apologizing for disrupting family activities with my personal plans. The shift was so gradual and was always presented in terms of family harmony and consideration for others. I was made to feel that insisting on my preferences was selfish, that truly caring about family meant being flexible and accommodating. But flexibility only went in one direction. My routines could be changed to accommodate family needs, but family activities were rarely modified to accommodate my preferences or comfort. The moment that began my awakening to the reality of my situation came during a conversation with my longtime friend and neighbor, Patricia Hensley. Patricia and I had been friends for 25 years, and she had watched the changes in my household with growing concern. "Eleanor, honey, I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer," Patricia said during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you happy with how your life has changed since Thomas and Jessica moved in? Do you feel like yourself in your own home?" I started to give an automatic positive response, but Patricia held up her hand. "Before you answer, let me tell you what I've observed. You used to host beautiful dinner parties and charity events. You used to travel whenever you wanted. You used to make decisions about your home and your life without consulting anyone. You used to have your own routines and your own space." She paused, watching my expression carefully. "Now you ask my permission to meet for coffee because you're not sure if it conflicts with family plans. You haven't hosted an event in your own home in over a year. You've stopped talking about your business because family finances are complicated now. You seem like a guest in your own house." Her words hit me like a physical blow because they were undeniably true. I had been so focused on being a good grandmother and a supportive mother that I had gradually surrendered my own identity and authority. "Patricia, they needed help, and I wanted to be there for them." "Of course you did. But Eleanor, there's a difference between helping family and disappearing into family. You've built an incredible life and career. You've earned the right to live however makes you happy. Don't let anyone, even people you love, convince you that your preferences don't matter anymore." That conversation planted a seed of awareness that would grow into full recognition of how completely my life had been transformed, and not necessarily for the better. As 2024 progressed and we approached the 18-month mark of our living arrangement, I began to notice more troubling patterns. Thomas had given up actively looking for traditional employment, convinced that his various online ventures would eventually provide the breakthrough he needed. Jessica had stopped even pretending that her blog was a business and instead treated it as a full-time hobby funded by my resources. The twins, now 14, had grown accustomed to a lifestyle that their parents couldn't actually afford, but that I was expected to maintain. Private school, expensive sports, designer clothes, the latest electronics, all funded by Grandma Eleanor, as if it were natural and expected rather than generous. Most concerning of all was the way Thomas and Jessica had begun to speak about my house as if it were their family home rather than my personal property. They made plans for renovations, discussed changes they wanted to make, and referred to our house when talking to friends and neighbors. During a particularly eye-opening conversation, I overheard Jessica on the phone with her sister saying, "We're so lucky that Eleanor is letting us fix up the house. Thomas has so many ideas for improvements, and she's been really generous about funding the updates we need." The updates we needed in our house. Funded by my generosity. That's when I realized that somewhere along the way I had stopped being the homeowner who was generously sharing her space and had become the elderly relative who was lucky to be allowed to live in what had become their family home. The stage was set for the events that would unfold over the next few months, events that would test exactly how far my family was willing to push their advantage, and how much of my dignity they thought I was willing to sacrifice for the sake of family harmony. What they didn't know was that the 70-year-old woman they saw as a convenient source of housing and funding was still the same person who had built a multi-million-dollar real estate empire through careful planning, strategic thinking, and an absolute refusal to let anyone take advantage of her generosity. They were about to get a very expensive education in the difference between kindness and weakness. But first, they would push me just a little bit further than I was willing to go. The second year of our living arrangement brought changes that I initially interpreted as natural family evolution, but which I now recognize as the systematic establishment of a new hierarchy in my own home, one where I was no longer at the top. Thomas had completely abandoned any pretense of job searching by the spring of 2024. Instead, he had embraced what he called entrepreneurial flexibility, which seemed to involve spending most of his day in the converted guest house, monitoring cryptocurrency markets, participating in online trading forums, and developing elaborate business plans for ventures that required substantial upfront investment but promised revolutionary returns. His latest obsession was something called social commerce integration, essentially a plan to create an app that would allow social media influencers to sell products directly through their content. He had spreadsheets showing projected revenues in the millions, partnership agreements with influencers who had never actually agreed to work with him, and a timeline that always seemed to be just 6 months away from launch. "Mom, this is the future of retail," he would explain during our increasingly one-sided dinner conversations. "Jessica's blog is going to be the perfect testing ground for the platform. Once we prove the concept with her audience, we'll be able to scale to thousands of influencers across multiple social media platforms." The fact that Jessica's blog had fewer than 200 regular followers and generated approximately $50 per month in affiliate revenue seemed irrelevant to his projections. When I gently pointed out the gap between his ambitious plans and current reality, he would explain that I didn't understand the digital marketplace and that traditional business metrics don't apply to disruptive technologies. Jessica, meanwhile, had fully embraced her role as a lifestyle content creator, which apparently required constant investment in new equipment, clothing, and experiences that could be photographed and shared with her small but highly engaged audience. Her daily routine had evolved into what she called content development, planning photo shoots around the house and grounds, shopping for props and outfits, and spending hours editing photos and writing captions that presented our family. Life as an aspirational lifestyle that others should envy and emulate. "Eleanor, you have to understand that this isn't just a hobby," she would explain when I questioned the necessity of another $300 photography backdrop or $500 ring light setup. "This is brand building. Every successful influencer started with a small audience and built their following through consistent, high-quality content. We're investing in our future." The "we" in that sentence was telling. Somehow, my financial support of her equipment purchases had become an investment in our future success, even though I had never agreed to become a business partner in her social media ventures. Perhaps the most concerning change was in Madison and Mason, who had transformed from grateful grandchildren into entitled teenagers who seemed to view me as a convenient source of funding rather than a family member deserving respect. Madison, now 14, had developed expensive tastes that she justified as necessary for maintaining her social position at Charleston Preparatory Academy. Her wardrobe required constant updating with designer brands that her classmates wore. Her extracurricular activities, competitive dance, private voice lessons, advanced art classes, all came with substantial fees that were presented to me as educational investments. "Grandma Eleanor, everyone at school has the new iPhone," she would announce, not as a request, but as a statement of fact that implied I should immediately address this social disadvantage. When I suggested she could earn money for the phone, through chores or a part-time job, she looked genuinely confused. But Grandma, I don't have time for a job. I have dance practice every day after school, voice lessons on Wednesdays, art class on Saturdays, and I need time for homework and social activities. Mom says my job is to focus on my education and personal development. Mason had developed an equally expensive hobby in competitive gaming and technology. His room was filled with elaborate computer setups, gaming chairs, and equipment that he claimed was necessary for his content creation career and esports development. At 14, he was already talking about becoming a professional gamer or technology influencer, careers that apparently required thousands of dollars in equipment but no actual work experience or education. Grandma, you don't understand the gaming industry, he would explain with the confident dismissiveness that teenagers reserve for adults they consider hopelessly out of touch. This isn't just playing games. This is skill development, brand building, and network creation. Some professional gamers make millions of dollars per year. When I pointed out that very few people actually achieve that level of success and suggested he might want to develop backup plans, he would roll his eyes and appeal to his parents, who invariably supported his passion pursuits, and suggested I was being negative about his dreams. Both children had internalized their parents' attitude that my financial support was a natural resource rather than a generous gift. They made requests, or rather announcements of need, without any sense that they were asking for significant favors. They had never been taught to show gratitude for the private school education, expensive activities, designer clothes, and latest technology that I provided. More troubling, they had begun to treat me with the casual disrespect that teenagers often show toward family members they consider powerless. They would interrupt my conversations, ignore my requests, and dismiss my opinions about everything from household rules to current events. When I tried to discuss this with Thomas and Jessica, they assured me that this was normal teenage behavior, and that I shouldn't take it personally. They suggested that being too strict with the children would damage my relationship with them, and that the best approach was to be understanding and supportive of their developmental needs. The message was clear. Any attempt to set boundaries or demand respect would be seen as inappropriate interference in their parenting decisions. One of the most galling aspects of our evolving living situation was watching Jessica document our family life for her blog and social media accounts in ways that completely misrepresented the reality of our relationships and arrangements. Her Charleston Charm blog presented a curated version of our life that bore little resemblance to the actual dynamics in our household. Photos of family dinners that I had prepared and paid for were captioned as examples of multi-generational family cooperation and Jessica's entertaining style. Pictures of the twins in their expensive clothes and equipment were tagged as examples of mindful parenting and supporting children's authentic interests. My beautiful home and gardens became the backdrop for content that portrayed Jessica as a successful lifestyle influencer living in her family's historic Charleston estate. The antique furniture, art collection, and landscaping that I had spent decades assembling were presented as elements of Jessica's refined aesthetic and the Whitmore family's sophisticated lifestyle. Most infuriatingly, Jessica had begun incorporating me into her content as a prop rather than a person. Photos of me cooking dinner were captioned as learning traditional Southern recipes from Thomas's family. Pictures of me helping with homework were presented as examples of the benefits of multi-generational living. My garden tours were filmed as Jessica explores the family estate. I was being used to add authenticity and gravitas to content that was essentially promoting Jessica's personal brand, but I was never credited as a contributor or partner. Instead, I was presented as a supporting character in her family's lifestyle story. The most frustrating part was that this content was being created in my home, using my resources and featuring my life, but I had no control over how I was portrayed. or what aspects of our family life were shared with strangers on the internet. When I expressed concerns about privacy and asked to review content before it was posted, Jessica explained that spontaneous, authentic content was more engaging than staged posts, and that asking for approval would compromise the natural family dynamics that made her blog appealing. Essentially, I was told that my comfort and privacy were less important than the marketability of her content. As Thomas and Jessica became more comfortable with their living arrangement, their financial expectations and demands escalated dramatically. What had begun as occasional requests for help had evolved into an assumption that I would fund their entire lifestyle without question or complaint. The monthly contributions to household expenses that they had promised never materialized in any meaningful way. Thomas would occasionally buy groceries or pay a utility bill, then reference these small payments for months as evidence of his financial contribution to our household. Jessica would handle some meal preparation and housekeeping tasks, then point to the money I was saving on domestic help as her contribution to our shared expenses. Meanwhile, the actual costs of supporting their family had grown exponentially. Private school tuition for both children was now $28,000 annually. Their extracurricular activities, equipment, and clothing cost another $15,000 per year. Family vacations that Jessica documented for her blog cost $8,000 to $12,000 each and were presented as necessary for content creation and family bonding. Thomas's business ventures required constant infusions of capital, app development costs, marketing consultations, equipment purchases, and networking events that seemed to involve expensive dinners and conference attendance. In 2024 alone, I had invested over $35,000 in his various entrepreneurial pursuits, with no visible progress toward actual revenue generation. Jessica's blog required equally expensive support. Professional photography equipment, wardrobe updates, home staging purchases, and marketing tools that promised to grow her audience and monetize her content. She had convinced herself that she was on the verge of breakthrough success that would justify all previous investments. "Eleanor, you have to spend money to make money," she would explain when I questioned the necessity of another $1,000 photography workshop or $500 social media strategy course. All the successful influencers invested heavily in their development before they started seeing returns. "We're building a brand that will support our family for decades." The problem was that after 2 years of heavy investment, there were still no returns. Her audience remained small, her revenue remained minimal, and her content quality seemed to plateau rather than improve despite all the expensive equipment and training. But any suggestion that we should reconsider the strategy or reduce expenses was met with accusations that I didn't believe in their potential or didn't understand modern business models. Perhaps the most subtle but significant change was the gradual erosion of boundaries around my personal space, possessions, and autonomy. What had begun as requests for small accommodations had evolved into assumptions about my availability and resources that I found increasingly intrusive. My home office, which I had used for decades to manage my real estate investments and business affairs, was gradually transformed into a family workspace. Thomas needed desk space for his business development activities. Jessica required good lighting and internet access for her content creation. The twins needed quiet study space for homework and online classes. My carefully organized filing systems were disrupted by family papers and equipment. My business calls were interrupted by family activities and noise. My work schedule was expected to accommodate family meetings, school events, and household crises. When I suggested that I needed private workspace to manage my substantial business interests, I was told that family comes first, and that being too rigid about personal space was inconsistent with the collaborative spirit of multi-generational living. My personal belongings were gradually incorporated into family use without explicit permission. My car became the family vehicle for teenager transportation and errand running. My credit cards were used for family purchases with the assumption that I would handle the payments. My contacts and relationships were leveraged for family benefit without my involvement in the decision-making. When Madison needed letters of recommendation for summer programs, Jessica contacted my business associates and charitable organization, Connections, on my behalf, presenting herself as my representative and making commitments about my availability for future involvement. When Thomas wanted to explore real estate investment opportunities, he scheduled meetings with my contractors, property managers, and financial advisors, presenting himself as my business partner and heir, rather than my unemployed son living in my house. These boundary violations were always presented as efficiency measures or family cooperation, but they gradually stripped away my autonomy and authority over my own life and business affairs. One of the most insidious changes was the gradual isolation from my social network and community connections. This wasn't accomplished through direct restrictions or demands, but through a systematic process of making my previous social activities inconvenient, uncomfortable, or seemingly selfish. My weekly coffee meetings with Patricia became difficult to schedule because family activities always seemed to conflict with our planned times. My book club meetings were disruptive to family routines because they involved having friends over to the house in the evening. My charity board meetings were stressful and too much responsibility for someone my age. Jessica was particularly effective at creating social obstacles that seemed reasonable on the surface, but made maintaining outside relationships extremely difficult. When I planned to host my traditional Christmas charity fundraiser, she expressed concerns about the impact on the children's school performance and holiday stress levels. When I wanted to attend my monthly real estate investment group meetings, she reminded me of family commitments and obligations that had somehow been scheduled for the same times. "Eleanor, we just want to make sure you're not overextending yourself," Jessica would say with apparent concern. "You're doing so much for our family already. We don't want you to feel obligated to maintain all these outside commitments too." The message was that my family duties should take priority over my personal relationships and professional activities. Any time I spent on outside interests was time I was taking away from family needs and responsibilities. Gradually, my social calendar became dominated by family activities, school events, and Jessica's content creation needs. My friends began to assume I was no longer available for the social and professional activities that had been central to my identity for decades. When old friends called to check on me, family members would often answer my phone and explain that I was very busy with family responsibilities or focusing on grandparent duties in ways that made me sound like I had chosen to step back from my previous life rather than being systematically excluded from it. One of the most manipulative tactics that emerged during this period was the use of health concerns to justify increased control over my activities and decisions. Despite the fact that I was healthy, active, and mentally sharp, Thomas and Jessica began to express concerns about my well-being that were used to limit my independence. These concerns were always framed as loving worry rather than control, but they had the effect of infantilizing me and creating justification for family oversight of my decisions. "Mom, we noticed you seemed a little tired after your meeting with the property management company," Thomas would say. "Maybe it would be better if I started handling those kinds of business meetings for you. You shouldn't have to deal with all that stress." "Eleanor, you've been doing so much for the family," Jessica would add. "We're worried that you're not taking enough time to rest and take care of yourself. Maybe you should let us handle more of the household responsibilities so you can focus on your health." Any sign of normal fatigue, temporary forgetfulness, or minor physical discomfort was seized upon as evidence that I needed more support and supervision. When I mentioned having a headache, it became proof that I was under too much stress. When I forgot where I put my reading glasses, it was a sign of concerning memory issues. When I felt tired after a long day, it was evidence that I was overexerting myself. These expressions of concern were always accompanied by offers to help, by taking over responsibilities and decisions that I was perfectly capable of handling myself. Thomas offered to manage my property investments to reduce stress. Jessica volunteered to handle my correspondence and social scheduling to make things easier. The twins suggested I didn't need to attend their school events because travel might be tiring. The cumulative effect was to create a narrative that I was becoming frail and dependent, even though I was actually healthier and more active than many people my age. This narrative was then used to justify increased control over my life and decreased respect for my autonomy. When I pushed back against these limitations or insisted on maintaining my independence, I was accused of being stubborn or not taking care of myself. Family members would express worry that I was in denial about my changing needs and capabilities. Perhaps the most ominous development during this period was the emergence of casual discussions about the future of my property and estate planning. These conversations were always presented as practical family planning, rather than attempts to influence my decisions, but they revealed assumptions about inheritance and control that I found deeply disturbing. Thomas began making comments about when we inherit the house and discussing renovation plans that would be implemented after Mom is gone. He talked about which rooms he would convert to different purposes, how he would modify the landscaping, and what changes would make the property more suitable for modern family living. Jessica started researching estate planning strategies and would share articles about tax-efficient wealth transfer and multi-generational property management. She suggested that I should consult with estate planning attorneys to make sure everything is properly structured for the family's future. Both of them began to reference my property and investments as family assets rather than my personal wealth. They spoke about our estate planning and the family's financial future, as if my wealth had already become communal property rather than assets that I had earned and still controlled. Most concerning were the subtle suggestions that I should consider transferring property ownership to the family while I was still alive to avoid inheritance taxes and ensure smooth transitions. These suggestions were always accompanied by assurances that such transfers would be just legal formalities, and that I would, of course, continue to live here and maintain control over everything. When I expressed reluctance to discuss such arrangements, I was told that being proactive about estate planning was simply responsible financial management and that resisting such discussions was unfair to the family members who needed to understand their future security. The underlying message was that my property and wealth were not really mine to control indefinitely, but family resources that should be managed for the benefit of all family members, with their input and involvement in decision-making. By the fall of 2024, 18 months after Thomas and Jessica had moved into my house, I was living as a stranger, in my own home. My routines revolved around family schedules. My finances supported lifestyle choices I had no input in making. My social life consisted primarily of family activities and obligations. My business interests were managed around family convenience rather than my professional priorities. I had somehow become the least important person in my own household, despite being the person whose resources made everything possible. The family operated with the assumption that my role was to provide funding and support for their goals and activities, while their role was to allow me to participate in their family life as a grateful and accommodating grandmother. My preferences, comfort, and autonomy were consistently treated as less important than family harmony, which seemed to mean my willingness to accommodate everyone else's needs without asserting my own. Patricia Hensley continued to express concern about the changes she observed in my life and personality. During one of our increasingly rare coffee meetings, she made an observation that haunted me for weeks afterward. "Eleanor, honey, you've become invisible in your own life," she said gently but firmly. "You're so busy making everyone else comfortable, and happy that you've forgotten you have the right to be comfortable and happy too. This isn't what Robert would have wanted for you. She was right, and I knew it. But I also felt trapped by my own generosity and maternal instincts. How do you establish boundaries with family members who are living in your house? How do you demand respect from people you love? How do you prioritize your own needs when doing so might harm relationships with your children and grandchildren? Spent months wrestling with these questions, feeling guilty for being unhappy with an arrangement that was supposed to be mutually beneficial, and wondering if my discomfort was simply the natural adjustment period for multi-generational living. What I didn't realize was that Thomas and Jessica were preparing to test just how far they could push their advantage. They had successfully established themselves as the primary decision-makers in my household, convinced me to fund their lifestyle indefinitely, and isolated me from outside support and perspective. Now they were ready to take the final step in their systematic takeover of my life, removing the last vestiges of my authority and dignity in my own home. The garage conversion project that would become the final straw was already in the planning stages, though I didn't know it yet. They had convinced themselves that I was now so dependent on their companionship and so committed to maintaining family relationships that I would accept any arrangement they proposed. They were about to discover that they had seriously miscalculated the limits of my patience and the extent of my power. But first, they would push me just a little bit further than I was willing to go. And when they did, the 70-year-old woman they had systematically marginalized would remind them exactly who owned the house they had been treating as their personal property. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything. They had established their dominance gradually and systematically, assuming that my acceptance of small indignities meant I would accept larger ones. They were about to learn the difference between choosing to be generous and being forced to be submissive. And I was about to remember exactly who I had been before I let my love for my family override my respect for myself. The conversation that would change everything happened on a cold February morning in 2025, almost 18 months, after Thomas and Jessica had moved into my house. I was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when they approached me with what they called an exciting family project proposal. "Mom, we've been doing some research about optimizing our living space," Thomas began, setting down his laptop where he'd apparently prepared a presentation. "We think we've found a solution that will make everyone more comfortable and give us all more privacy." Jessica sat beside him, her expression bright with enthusiasm that I would soon understand was carefully calculated. "Eleanor, you know how we've all been adjusting to living together, and sometimes the house feels a bit crowded with all of our different activities and schedules." I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. After 18 months of watching my home and life be gradually taken over, any conversation about optimizing our living arrangement filled me with dread. "What kind of solution are you proposing?" I asked carefully. Thomas opened his laptop and showed me a series of photos and floor plans that he'd apparently been working on for weeks. "We want to convert the garage into a beautiful private living suite. It would have its own entrance, a kitchenette, a full bathroom and sleeping area. It would be like having your own apartment while still being part of the family." I stared at the images on his screen, trying to process what he was suggesting. "You want to convert the garage into a living space?" "Not just any living space," Jessica jumped in quickly. "A beautiful, customized suite designed specifically for your needs and preferences. Think about it. You'd have complete privacy when you want it, but you'd still be right here with family when you want companionship." Thomas clicked through more images showing garage conversions that looked surprisingly sophisticated. "Mom, this isn't about shoving you into a storage space. This is about creating a custom living environment that's perfectly suited to your lifestyle. No more noise from the kids when you want to read. No more interruptions when you're trying to work. Your own space, your own schedule, your own rules." The proposal was presented with such enthusiasm and apparent thoughtfulness that I almost missed the fundamental problem. They were suggesting I move out of my own house to live in the garage. "But this is my house," I said slowly. "Why would I move into the garage when I already have my own bedroom and office here? Jessica's expression became earnest and concerned. Eleanor, we've noticed that you sometimes seem overwhelmed by all the family activity. You've mentioned feeling like you don't have enough private space, and we thought this would be the perfect solution. When did I mention that? Well, not in so many words, Thomas said. But we can tell when you're feeling stressed by all the noise and chaos. And honestly, the main house layout isn't really ideal for multi-generational living. The kids need space to be kids. Jessica needs room for her content creation, and I need workspace for business development. So your solution is for me to move into the garage? Into a beautiful custom apartment, Jessica corrected. Eleanor, this would be like having your own luxury studio. We've researched contractors, and we can have it completed in just 6 weeks. Hardwood floors, custom cabinetry, a gorgeous bathroom with a walk-in shower. Everything designed exactly to your specifications. Thomas leaned forward, his expression sincere and persuasive. Mom, think about what you'd gain. Complete independence, but with family right nearby. Your own kitchen so you can eat whatever you want, whenever you want. Your own thermostat so you can keep it exactly the temperature you prefer. Your own entertainment setup so you don't have to compete with the kids for TV time. They had clearly rehearsed this presentation and anticipated my objections. For every concern I raised, they had a response that made their proposal sound reasonable and beneficial. What about my current bedroom? My office? All my furniture and belongings? We'll move everything you want into your new suite, Jessica assured me. And honestly, it might be a good opportunity to downsize a bit. You've mentioned having more possessions than you need, and this would be a chance to keep only the things that really matter to you. I had never mentioned having too many possessions. In fact, every item in my house had been carefully chosen and held significant personal or financial value. And what happens to the main house? What rooms would you use for what purposes? Thomas exchanged a quick look with Jessica before answering. Well, we'd naturally need to spread out a bit more. The kids are getting older and need more space. Madison really needs her own study area, and Mason's gaming setup requires better acoustics. Jessica needs more room for content creation and equipment storage. And my home office? We thought that could become Madison's study room, Jessica said. She's at such a crucial point in her academic development, and she really needs a quiet, sophisticated environment for homework and college preparation. They were planning to take over my entire house while moving me into the garage. My bedroom would become something else. My office would become Madison's study room. My living spaces would be repurposed for their family's needs and activities, but the way they presented it, I was the one who would benefit from this arrangement. I would gain privacy and independence. They would be doing me a favor by creating a custom living space designed for my comfort and preferences. How much would this conversion cost? I asked. We've gotten quotes from several contractors, Thomas said, pulling up another screen. For a really high-quality conversion with all the features we've discussed, we're looking at approximately $45,000 to $50,000. And who would pay for this? Another glance between them. Well, it would be an investment in your comfort and our family's living situation, Jessica said. We thought it would be appropriate to handle it as a family expense. Family expense, meaning I would pay $50,000 to convert my own garage into living space so I could move out of my own house and let them take over the main rooms. I need to think about this, I said. Of course, Thomas said quickly. But Mom, we're really excited about this project. We think it's going to make everyone so much happier. And the sooner we get started, the sooner you can start enjoying your new independence. Over the following days, they continued to present the garage conversion as an exciting opportunity rather than the fundamental displacement it actually represented. They showed me Pinterest boards of beautiful garage apartment conversions. They brought me contractor estimates and timelines. They discussed design elements and layout options as if my enthusiasm for the project was a given. They had convinced themselves, or wanted me to believe they had convinced themselves, that moving me into the garage was an act of generosity rather than an eviction from my own home. When I didn't immediately embrace their garage conversion proposal, Thomas and Jessica launched a systematic campaign to convince me that their plan was not only reasonable, but necessary for family harmony and my own well-being. The campaign began with what seemed like innocent observations about the challenges of our current living arrangement. "Eleanor, I noticed you seemed frustrated yesterday when the kids were playing music while you were trying to read," Jessica mentioned during breakfast. "That's exactly why the garage suite would be such a blessing for you. You'd never have to deal with household noise again." "Mom, I could tell you were stressed when I had that business call during your book club meeting," Thomas added. "With your own space, you'd never have to worry about family activities interfering with your personal time." They began to frame every minor inconvenience of shared living as evidence that I desperately needed the solution they were offering. If Madison practiced piano while I was on a phone call, it proved I needed my own space. If dinner conversation was too loud for my preference, it demonstrated the necessity of my own kitchenette. If I had to wait to use the bathroom in the morning, it showed why I needed my own private facilities. But the pressure campaign also included more subtle manipulations designed to make me feel guilty for not embracing their plan. "We just want you to be happy, Eleanor," Jessica would say with apparent sincerity. "We can see that living with a busy family isn't always easy for you, and we want to find a solution that gives you everything you need." Thomas would add, "Mom, we love having you here, but we want you to love being here too. If our current arrangement isn't working for you, we want to fix that." They presented my hesitation about the garage conversion as evidence that I was unhappy with family life and that they were trying to accommodate my dissatisfaction. My reluctance to move into the garage was reframed as ingratitude for their thoughtful solution to problems I hadn't actually complained about. The twins were recruited to support the campaign, though I suspected they didn't fully understand what they were advocating for. "Grandma, it would be so cool if you had your own apartment," Madison said one evening. "You could decorate it however you want, and it would be like having your own little house. And we could visit you there," Mason added. "It would be like you were our neighbor instead of just living in the same house." The children's enthusiasm was genuine, but it was based on the romantic idea of me having a separate space, rather than understanding that I was being moved out of my own home to make room for their family's expansion. When gentle persuasion didn't work, the pressure became more direct. "Eleanor, we've already contacted contractors and started the permit process," Jessica announced one morning. "We wanted to move forward with the timeline we discussed so you can start enjoying your new space as soon as possible." "I never agreed to move forward with the project," I protested. "But you said you'd think about it," Thomas replied. "And we thought that meant you were on board with the general concept. We just wanted to handle the logistics so you wouldn't have to worry about the details." They had proceeded with planning and spending as if my agreement was a foregone conclusion. They had made financial commitments and timeline promises based on the assumption that I would eventually accept their proposal because I had no choice. "Mom, the contractor is available to start next week," Thomas continued. "If we don't take this slot, we might have to wait months for another opportunity. We really think it's best to move forward now." And honestly, Jessica added, living in a construction zone isn't going to be comfortable for anyone. The sooner we start, the sooner everyone can settle into their permanent arrangements. They were pressuring me to approve a $50,000 project that would displace me from my own home by claiming that delays would be inconvenient for the family. The conversation that finally broke my tolerance happened on a Saturday morning when I was trying to enjoy coffee and read the newspaper in my own kitchen. Thomas and Jessica approached me with contractor estimates and what they called final details for the garage conversion project. "Mom, we need to make some decisions about the garage suite," Thomas said, spreading papers across the kitchen table, where I was trying to eat breakfast. The contractor needs answers about electrical requirements, plumbing fixtures, and flooring choices. I haven't agreed to this project, I said firmly. Jessica's expression became patient in a way that was unmistakably condescending. Eleanor, we understand that change can be scary, especially at your age. But sometimes we have to embrace new arrangements that will make everyone happier in the long run. At my age? Well, older adults sometimes have difficulty adjusting to change, even when it's beneficial, Thomas explained. We just want to make sure you understand how much better this arrangement will be for everyone. Thomas, I'm 70, not 90, and I'm perfectly capable of understanding the implications of your proposal. Of course you are, Jessica said quickly. But maybe you're not seeing all the advantages. Eleanor, this garage suite is going to be beautiful. You'll have complete independence, total privacy, and your own space designed exactly for your needs. My needs? Or your need to take over my house? The question hung in the air for a moment before Thomas responded with the kind of strained patience usually reserved for difficult children. Mom, this isn't about taking over anything. This is about creating a living arrangement that works better for everyone. The main house will still be your property, but it will be configured in a way that gives everyone appropriate space and privacy. Appropriate space, which means I get the garage while you get the house. You get a custom apartment while we handle the responsibilities of maintaining the main house, Jessica corrected. Think about what you'll be freed from. Yard work, major cleaning, maintenance issues, all the burdens of homeownership. Those aren't burdens to me. This is my home. Thomas leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. Mom, can we be honest here? You're not getting any younger, and this house is getting harder for you to manage. We've noticed you seem tired more often, and we're worried about you trying to maintain such a large property by yourself. I maintain this property with professional help that I can easily afford. But wouldn't it be easier to have a smaller space that's designed for your current needs? Jessica asked. Eleanor, we're not trying to push you out. We're trying to create a situation where you can age in place comfortably while still being close to family. Age in place, in the garage, while they took over my house. And what if I say no? I asked. Thomas and Jessica exchanged one of their meaningful looks before Thomas answered. Mom, we hope you won't say no, because we think this is really the best solution for everyone. But we also have to be realistic about our family's needs going forward. What does that mean? Jessica took over, her voice gentle but firm. It means that our current living arrangement isn't sustainable long-term. The kids need more space as they get older. Thomas needs proper workspace for his business development. I need room for content creation and equipment storage. We all need to think about what's going to work best for our family's future. And if this house can't accommodate all of our needs in its current configuration, Thomas added, we might need to consider other living arrangements. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. If I didn't agree to move into the garage, they might move out entirely, taking my grandchildren and leaving me alone in my house. Are you threatening to move out if I don't agree to your garage conversion? We're not threatening anything, Jessica said quickly. We're just being honest about our needs and trying to find a solution that keeps our family together while meeting everyone's requirements. Because frankly, Mom, Thomas continued, Jessica and I have been talking about whether this living arrangement is working for us long-term. We love being close to you, but we also need to consider what's best for Madison and Mason's development, and our own goals and aspirations. They were presenting me with a choice between agreeing to live in the garage or losing access to my grandchildren. They had calculated that my attachment to family would override my objection to being displaced from my own home. That's when I realized they had fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. Sitting at my own kitchen table, listening to my son and daughter-in-law explain why I should pay $50,000 to move into my own garage so they could take over my house, I experienced a moment of absolute clarity about my situation. For 18 months, I had been gradually accepting smaller indignities in the name of family harmony. I had allowed my routines to be disrupted, my space to be taken over, my resources to be consumed, and my authority to be undermined because I believed that was what good mothers and grandmothers did. I had told myself that the problems were temporary, that the benefits of family closeness outweighed the inconveniences, and that my discomfort was a small price to pay for being part of my grandchildren's daily lives. But the garage conversion proposal stripped away all the rationalizations and revealed the truth about my situation. I had become a tenant in my own home, and now I was being evicted to make room for the real family. Thomas and Jessica had spent months conditioning me to accept that their needs came first, that my preferences were less important than family harmony, and that my role was to facilitate their goals rather than pursue my own. They had gradually convinced themselves that I was becoming a burden rather than recognizing that I was the person making their lifestyle possible. They had reframed my generosity as dependency and my accommodation as evidence that I needed their care and management. But most importantly, they had made the critical error of assuming that my kindness was weakness and that my love for my family meant I would accept any treatment they chose to impose. "You know what?" I said, standing up from the kitchen table and looking at both of them directly. "You're absolutely right. Our current living arrangement isn't working." Thomas looked relieved. "So you'll consider the garage conversion?" "No, Thomas, I won't consider the garage conversion, but I will solve our space problem." Jessica looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you're right about needing to reconfigure our living arrangement. But instead of me moving into the garage, I think it's time for you to move out." The silence in the kitchen was profound. "Mom, you can't be serious," Thomas said. "Where would we go? We don't have the resources to move out right now." "That's not really my problem anymore, is it? You've made it clear that this house doesn't meet your family's needs and that you'd be happier in a different arrangement. I'm simply agreeing with your assessment." Jessica's expression shifted from confusion to panic. "Eleanor, we didn't mean we wanted to move out. We meant we wanted to optimize our current living situation by moving me into the garage." "No, Jessica, I think Thomas was right the first time. You need space for the kids, workspace for business development, room for content creation. This house clearly can't provide what you need." "But Mom," Thomas protested, "we've been here for 18 months. The kids are settled in school. Jessica's built her content around this location, and I've got business projects that depend on having stable housing." "Then you should have thought about that before. You decided to redesign my living situation without my input." I could see them both recalculating, realizing that their pressure campaign had backfired spectacularly. "Eleanor, maybe we approached this wrong," Jessica said, her voice becoming conciliatory. "Maybe we should table the garage conversion idea and just focus on making our current arrangement work better." "You know what, Jessica? I think you approached our entire relationship wrong. And I think it's time I approached it differently too." What Thomas and Jessica didn't know was that while they had been planning my displacement to the garage, I had been making some very interesting phone calls to some very important people. The first call had been to Robert Chen, one of Charleston's most successful real estate developers and my former business partner on several major projects. Robert and I had maintained a friendship over the years, and he had often expressed interest in acquiring prime real estate in the historic district. "Eleanor, Whitmore, it's been too long. How can I help you?" "Robert, I have a business proposition that might interest you. How would you like to acquire one of the most beautiful historic properties in Charleston?" "I'm always interested in prime real estate. What property are we talking about?" "My house. 4,500 square feet, colonial architecture, completely renovated, 2 acres of landscaped grounds, pool, guest house, historic district location." "Eleanor, your house is spectacular, but I thought you loved living there." "I do love the house, Robert, but my living situation has become complicated. I'm considering all my options, including selling." What would you be looking for in terms of price and timeline? Market value, which I believe is approximately $2.8 million. And as for timeline, how quickly could you close if we reached an agreement? If the property is as I remember and the financials work out, I could close in 2 weeks. Eleanor, are you serious about this? I'm very serious. But Robert, I should mention that there are currently tenants living in the house who would need to be given appropriate notice. Tenants? I thought you lived there alone. It's a family situation that has become untenable. The current occupants will need to find alternative housing arrangements. I understand. Eleanor, would you like me to come take a look at the property this week? That would be perfect. The second call was to Margaret Hayes, one of Charleston's most respected real estate attorneys who had handled several property transactions for me over the years. Margaret, I need to understand my legal options for a property sale involving family members who are currently living in my house without a formal lease agreement. Eleanor, are you considering selling your home? I'm considering all my options. What would be the legal requirements for notifying current occupants about a sale? If they don't have a formal lease, they would be considered tenants at will, which means you could terminate their occupancy with 30 days written notice. If you're selling the property, the new owner could require vacant possession at closing. And what if the current occupants refuse to leave? Then they would be trespassing, and you could pursue legal remediation through the courts. But Eleanor, this sounds like a complicated family situation. Are you sure a sale is the best approach? Margaret, let me ask you something as a legal professional. If someone has been living in a property for 18 months without paying rent, consuming resources, and now demanding that the property owner move into the garage to make room for their needs, what would you call that situation? I would call that exploitation, and possibly elder abuse depending on the circumstances. That's what I thought. Margaret, I want you to prepare sale documents and eviction notices. I want everything legally bulletproof. How quickly do you want to move forward? I want to be ready to execute everything within 2 weeks. The third call was to Patricia Hensley, my longtime friend and the only person who had consistently supported my concerns about my living situation. Patricia, I need to ask you for a favor, and I need you to keep this conversation completely confidential. Of course, Eleanor. What's going on? I'm selling my house, and I need a place to stay for a few weeks while I find a new living situation. Eleanor, what happened? Did Thomas and Jessica do something? They suggested I move into the garage so they could have more space in the main house, and they wanted me to pay for the garage conversion. Those people. Eleanor, of course you can stay with me as long as you need. But are you sure about selling? That house is your life's work. Patricia, the house is just a building. My life's work was creating wealth and independence. The house was just one way I chose to use those resources. If it's no longer serving my needs, it's time to deploy my assets differently. Where will you go long term? I'm looking at several options. There's a beautiful penthouse condo in the historic district that just came on the market. Luxury building, concierge services, maintenance-free living, and absolutely no room for ungrateful family members. Eleanor, I'm proud of you for choosing yourself for once. The fourth call was to David Richardson, one of Charleston's most exclusive real estate agents, who specialized in luxury properties. David, I need you to quietly research luxury condos and townhomes in the historic district. Something elegant, low maintenance, with excellent security and privacy. Eleanor, are you looking to downsize? I'm looking to optimize. I want a beautiful space that's entirely my own, where I can entertain when I choose to and have solitude when I prefer it. I have several properties that might interest you. There's a penthouse at Charleston Harbor Place that's absolutely stunning. 2,500 square feet, harbor views, top floor privacy, concierge services. How much? $1.2 million, but I think we could negotiate. David, I want to see it this afternoon. The Charleston Harbor Place penthouse was everything I hadn't realized I was missing. 2,500 square feet of elegant modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Charleston Harbor. 2 bedrooms, 2 full bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen with high-end appliances, and a wraparound terrace perfect for entertaining or solitude. The building offered concierge services, valet, parking, a fitness center, and 24-hour security. The other residents were successful professionals and retirees who valued privacy and quiet living. Most importantly, it was entirely my space, designed for my comfort and preferences, with no room for family members who might gradually take over my life. "David, I want to make an offer," I said after spending an hour touring the property. "Excellent. What price point are you considering?" "Full asking price, cash offer, 30-day closing." "Eleanor, that's very aggressive. Are you sure you don't want to negotiate?" "David, I'm 70 years old. I don't have time for negotiations. I want this property, I can afford this property, and I want to move forward immediately." Within 24 hours, my offer was accepted. Within 48 hours, Robert Chen had toured my house and made his own full-price offer. Within 72 hours, I had signed contracts to sell my house and purchase my penthouse. Margaret Hayes had prepared all the legal documents, including 30-day eviction notices for Thomas and Jessica. Everything was in place for the most satisfying real estate transaction of my career. 3 weeks later, on a bright March morning, I woke up in my house for what would be the last time. Thomas and Jessica were still unaware that anything had changed, though they had been increasingly puzzled by my cheerful acceptance of their garage conversion timeline and my sudden lack of resistance to their household management decisions. Had spent those 3 weeks being the most accommodating grandmother and mother imaginable. I had agreed to every request, funded every expense, and appeared to embrace every suggestion they made about our family living arrangements. They thought they had finally worn down my resistance and convinced me to accept my reduced role in my own household. They were about to discover that they had been catastrophically wrong about my motivations and capabilities. At 9 a.m., Robert Chen arrived with his attorney, closing documents, and a cashier's check for $2.8 million at 9:30 a.m. The moving truck I had secretly arranged arrived to collect the personal belongings I had quietly packed over the previous weeks. At 10 a.m., Margaret Hayes arrived with eviction notices and legal documents. At 10:15 a.m., I had the most satisfying conversation of my adult life. "Thomas, Jessica, could you please join me in the living room? We need to discuss a change in our living arrangements." They arrived looking slightly annoyed at being interrupted from their morning routines, but still completely unaware that their world was about to change. "I wanted to let you know that I've sold the house," I announced calmly. The silence that followed was absolute. "You what?" Jessica managed to whisper. "I sold the house to Robert Chen, who you may remember as one of Charleston's most successful developers. He's purchasing it as an investment property." Thomas found his voice first. "Mom, you can't sell the house. We live here. The kids go to school here. Our whole life is here." "Your whole life was here," I corrected. "But as you explained to me, just 3 weeks ago, this house doesn't meet your family's needs. So I've solved that problem for you." Jessica looked like she was going to faint. "Eleanor, when did you do this? How did you do this without telling us?" "I did it over the past 3 weeks while you were planning my move to the garage. I decided that rather than reconfigure my living situation to accommodate your needs, I would reconfigure my entire life to prioritize my own needs." "But where are we supposed to go?" Thomas demanded. "That's not my problem anymore. Margaret Hayes has prepared 30-day eviction notices for you. You have until the end of the month to find alternative housing arrangements." Margaret stepped forward and handed each of them legal documents. "These notices comply with South Carolina tenant law and give you the legal minimum time to relocate." 30 days? Jessica's voice was rising. "We can't find a place and move in 30 days. "You can and you will," I said firmly, "because the alternative is being removed by the sheriff's department for trespassing." Thomas looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of shock, anger, and something that might have been respect. Mom, this is insane. You can't just sell your house and kick us out because you're upset about the garage conversion. Thomas, I'm not upset about the garage conversion. I'm educated about the garage conversion. It taught me exactly how little respect you have for me and how far you're willing to push your advantage. But what about the kids? Jessica demanded. What about Madison and Mason? They've been living here for 18 months. This is their home. No, Jessica, this was my home that I was generously sharing with your family. And your family decided that my presence in my own home was an inconvenience that needed to be managed by moving me to the garage. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens I had designed and the grounds I had maintained for decades. You spent 18 months gradually convincing me that my preferences didn't matter. My comfort was less important than your convenience, and my authority in my own home was subject to your family's needs. I turned back to face them. You made the mistake of believing that my kindness was weakness and that my love for my grandchildren meant I would accept any treatment you chose to impose. But Mom, Thomas protested, we never meant to make you feel unimportant. We love you, and we want you to be part of our family. Then you should have treated me like a valued family member instead of like a convenient resource to be managed and eventually displaced. What happened next was the moment I had been anticipating for 3 weeks. Thomas and Jessica began to realize that their financial situation was far more precarious than they had understood. Eleanor, maybe we can work something out, Jessica said, her voice becoming desperate. Maybe the garage conversion wasn't the best idea. Maybe we can find a different solution. Maybe we can, I agreed. But it won't involve this house, because I no longer own this house. Thomas looked confused. Where are you going to live? I've purchased a penthouse at Charleston Harbor Place. 2,500 square feet, harbor views, concierge services, and space for exactly one person to live exactly as she chooses. A penthouse? Jessica's voice was faint. $1.2 million paid in cash, which I was able to afford because I'm worth approximately $15 million, not including the $2.8 million I just received for this house. The expressions on their faces were priceless. For 18 months, they had treated me like a financially dependent widow who should be grateful for their company and management. They had never bothered to understand the extent of my wealth or the reality of my financial independence. $15 million, Thomas whispered. Thomas, did you think your mother built a successful real estate development company without accumulating substantial wealth? Did you think I was funding your lifestyle and supporting your family because I had limited resources and needed to feel useful? We didn't know, Jessica stammered. You didn't know? Because you never asked. You made assumptions about my financial situation that served your convenience, and you never bothered to verify whether those assumptions were accurate. I walked to my writing desk and pulled out a folder I had prepared for this moment. Margaret, would you please explain to Thomas and Jessica what they're losing by being evicted from this property? Margaret opened her legal folder and consulted her notes. Based on current rental market analysis, a property of this size and location would rent for approximately $4,500 to $5,000 per month. Over 18 months, that represents housing value of approximately $81,000 to $90,000. She continued, additionally, based on Eleanor's financial records, she has contributed approximately $120,000 to support your family's lifestyle, education, expenses, and business ventures during your residency here. So, in total, I said, you have received approximately $200,000 in housing and financial support over the past 18 months. That's more than most people earn in 3 years. Thomas and Jessica stared at the numbers, finally understanding the scope of my generosity and the magnitude of their miscalculation. But we were family, Thomas said weakly. We were helping each other. No, Thomas. I was helping you and you were taking advantage of me. there's a difference. Over the following hour, as the reality of their situation sank in, Thomas and Jessica went through several stages of reaction. First was denial. This can't be real. You can't just uproot our entire family because of one conversation about garage space. Then anger. This is cruel and vindictive. You're punishing the children for our mistakes. Then bargaining. What if we apologize? What if we promise things will be different? What if we contribute more to household expenses? Finally, a kind of grudging respect mixed with desperation. Mom, Thomas said, I think we've learned something important about taking family for granted. Is there any way we can start over and rebuild our relationship on better terms? Thomas, our relationship doesn't need to be rebuilt. It needs to be redefined. And that process starts with you understanding that I'm not your safety net, your funding source, or your housing solution. But we're still family, Jessica said. That has to count for something. It counts for everything. I replied. Which is why I'm giving you 30 days to find housing instead of having you removed immediately for trespassing. Which is why I'm not pursuing legal action for the financial exploitation of an elderly person. And which is why I'm willing to maintain a relationship with you going forward, provided it's based on mutual respect rather than your convenience. Thomas looked around the living room where his children had spent the last 18 months growing up. What do we tell Madison and Mason? You tell them the truth. That families sometimes need to live in different places while still loving each other. That their grandmother has decided to live independently while remaining part of their lives. And that this change is happening because their parents made some poor decisions about how to treat people they love. Will we still see you? Jessica asked quietly. That depends entirely on how you choose to treat me going forward. If you want a grandmother for your children and a mother for Thomas, I'm available. If you want a source of funding and housing for your lifestyle choices, I'm not. Madison and Mason arrived home from school that afternoon to find their parents frantically packing and their grandmother directing the removal of furniture and personal belongings. What's happening? Madison asked, looking confused and frightened by the chaos. Your grandmother has decided to sell the house, Thomas explained, his voice tight with stress. We need to move out by the end of the month. But where are we going to live? Mason demanded. All my friends are here. My gaming setup is here. This is our house. I knelt down to their level, something I hadn't been able to do comfortably in months because of the emotional distance that had grown between us. Madison, Mason, I want you to understand something very important. This house was never your house. It was my house that I was sharing with your family. And your parents made some decisions about how to treat me that I couldn't accept anymore. What kind of decisions? Madison asked. Jessica started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. They decided that I should move into the garage so they could have more space in the main house. They thought I should pay for converting the garage into an apartment and live there while they took over my home. Both children looked shocked. They wanted to put you in the garage? Mason asked incredulously. Yes. And when I said no, they suggested that if I didn't agree to their plan, they might move out and take you with them. Madison looked at her parents with an expression of disappointment that made my heart ache. You wanted to make Grandma live in the garage? It wasn't like that, Jessica said quickly. We were trying to create more space for everyone. By making Grandma move to the garage while we got our house? Madison's voice was rising. That's terrible, Thomas tried to explain. Madison, it was more complicated than that. We were trying to find a solution that worked for everyone. No, Dad. You were trying to find a solution that worked for us, even if it didn't work for Grandma, Madison shot back with a perceptiveness that surprised all of us. Mason, meanwhile, was processing the situation with typical teenage directness. So Grandma sold the house because you guys were being jerks to her? Mason, Jessica warned. That's not appropriate language. But it's accurate language, I said, and Mason grinned despite the tension. Over the next 2 weeks, as Thomas and Jessica scrambled to find housing they could actually afford. Several uncomfortable truths emerged about their financial situation and expectations. Without my subsidies, they could only afford a modest 3-bedroom rental house in a less prestigious neighborhood. The twins would need to change schools. Jessica's content creation would lose the beautiful backdrop of my historic property. Thomas's business ventures would need to operate without the credibility that came from living in a $2.8 million home. Most revealing was their complete shock at the actual cost of independent living. They had become so accustomed to my covering major expenses that they had lost track of what their lifestyle actually cost. "Eleanor, I had no idea groceries were so expensive," Jessica said during one of our final conversations at the house. "When I was buying food for the family, I thought you were being overly generous with the grocery budget. I didn't realize that feeding a family of 4 actually costs $800 to $1,000 per month. And utilities," Thomas added. "I knew you paid the electric and gas bills, but I didn't know they were $400 to $500 per month for a house this size. Plus internet, cable, water, trash pickup, lawn service, pool maintenance, home security. It all adds up to more than I was making from my trading activities." They were discovering that the lifestyle they had been living was completely unsustainable on their actual income. They had been living like people who earned $150,000 per year while actually earning less than $30,000 annually. "How did you manage it?" Jessica asked. "How did you make it look so effortless to maintain this lifestyle?" "I managed it by earning the money to support it," I replied. "I built a business, made smart investments, and accumulated wealth over 40 years of hard work. I didn't try to live a lifestyle I couldn't afford by depending on someone else's generosity." The contrast between their assumptions and reality was stark. They had imagined that my wealth was somehow limitless and that supporting their family was effortless for me. They had never considered that my generosity came at the expense of other things I might have chosen to do with my resources. Moving into my Charleston Harbor Place penthouse was like rediscovering myself after 18 months of gradual disappearance. Every room was arranged exactly to my preferences. Every piece of furniture was where I wanted it. Every decision about temperature, lighting, meals, and daily routines was mine alone. The morning routine I established was a perfect example of the freedom I had regained. I woke up when I naturally awakened, rather than being roused by family, noise, and activity. I made coffee exactly the way I preferred it, using expensive beans I had always enjoyed but had stopped buying because family coffee needed to suit everyone's tastes. I read the newspaper in complete silence, without interruption. From children's questions, Thomas's business calls, or Jessica's content creation activities. I ate breakfast at my own pace, choosing foods I enjoyed rather than preparing meals that would satisfy 4 different sets of preferences. The view from my terrace looked out over Charleston Harbor, where boats moved peacefully across the water and the city awakened at its own rhythm. It was a view that belonged entirely to me, that no one could disrupt or claim for their own purposes. Patricia Hensley came for coffee that first week and marveled at the transformation in my demeanor. "Eleanor, you look like yourself again," she said as we sat on my terrace watching the harbor. "I hadn't realized how much you had changed during those months with Thomas and Jessica until I see you now." "What do you mean?" "You had started walking differently, talking differently, even sitting differently. Like you were trying to take up less space, be less noticeable, cause less disruption. You had made yourself smaller to accommodate their needs." She was right. I had gradually diminished myself to fit into the role they had created for me in their family structure. I had learned to defer, to accommodate, to apologize for my preferences and needs. "And now?" I asked. "Now you're sitting up straight, speaking clearly, making decisions confidently. You're Eleanor Whitmore again instead of Thomas's dependent mother." One of the most unexpected benefits of my new living situation was the resurgence of my business interests and professional activities. Without the constant demands of family life and household management, I had mental energy and time to focus on opportunities I had neglected during my months as a full-time grandmother and household sponsor. Robert Chen approached me about partnering on a luxury development project in Mount Pleasant. "Eleanor, I've missed working with you. Your eye for design and understanding of market demand always elevated our projects beyond simple real estate development. I found myself excited about the prospect of returning to active business development. What kind of project are you considering? High-end townhomes targeting successful professionals who want luxury living without maintenance responsibilities. The kind of sophisticated development that requires someone who understands both construction quality and lifestyle marketing." Working on the project reminded me how much I had missed the intellectual challenge and creative satisfaction of real estate development. I had skills and experience that were valuable in the marketplace, not just useful for supporting family members who took my contributions for granted. I also reconnected with the Charleston Women's Business Alliance, where I had served on the board before becoming consumed with family obligations. The organization was planning a mentorship program for women over 50 who wanted to start or expand businesses. "Eleanor, we'd love to have you lead the real estate development track," said the current president, Carol Martinez. "You're one of the most successful developers in Charleston, and you have so much knowledge to share with women who are starting their second careers." The opportunity to mentor other women and share my expertise was incredibly fulfilling. I had spent months feeling like my experience and knowledge were irrelevant, only to discover that there was significant demand for exactly the wisdom I had accumulated over 4 decades in business. 3 months after the house sale, Thomas called to ask if we could meet for lunch. He had been working as a sales associate at a commercial real estate firm, earning steady income for the first time in years. Jessica had taken a marketing position with a Charleston nonprofit organization and was slowly rebuilding her professional credentials. "Mom, I owe you more than an apology," he said as we sat at a restaurant downtown. "I owe you acknowledgement that we treated you terribly and that you had every right to protect yourself from our exploitation. Thomas, what's important now is what we do going forward. I want to understand how we got so far off track. How did we go from you generously helping us to us treating you like a resource to be managed?" It was a conversation we should have had 18 months earlier, but I was grateful he was finally ready to have it. "I think it happened gradually," I said. "You started asking for small favors and accommodations, and I said yes because I wanted to be helpful. But each yes made the next request seem more reasonable, until eventually you were making demands that would have seemed outrageous if you had started with them. Like asking you to move to the garage. Like asking me to pay $50,000 to move to the garage so you could take over my house. Thomas, if you had suggested that on the day you moved in, I would have thought you were joking." He was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. "And I think," I continued, "that you started thinking of my resources as family assets rather than my personal property. You stopped seeing my support as generosity and started seeing it as obligation. You're right. And Mom, I want you to know that losing our living situation forced us to face some hard truths about our financial management and expectations. Such as the fact that Jessica and I had been living like we earned 3 times our actual income. We had gotten so used to your subsidies that we forgot they were subsidies, not permanent entitlements. And what's changed? We've learned to live within our means. We've found housing we can actually afford. Jessica's working full-time for the first time since the twins were born. I'm earning steady income instead of chasing get-rich-quick schemes. And most importantly, we're teaching Madison and Mason about earning and appreciating rather than just expecting and receiving. Over the following months, we slowly rebuilt our family relationship on completely different terms. Instead of me supporting their lifestyle, we developed a dynamic based on mutual respect and reciprocal consideration. Thomas and Jessica invited me to their new house for dinner once a month, and they insisted on cooking and hosting rather than expecting me to provide the meal or pay for restaurant visits. The twins were required to show genuine interest in my life and activities rather than treating me like a source of funding for their wants. Most significantly, they stopped making any financial requests or assumptions about my support. When Madison needed new dance shoes, Thomas and Jessica figured out how to budget for them. When Mason wanted to upgrade his gaming equipment, he was told to earn money through chores and part-time work. "Grandma Eleanor," Madison said during one of our dinners, "I want to apologize for how I acted when we lived at your house. I thought you were supposed to buy me things because that's what grandmothers did. But I understand now that you were being generous, not obligated. And I'm sorry for being disrespectful," Mason added. "I didn't realize that you were letting us live in your house for free, and that we should have been grateful instead of demanding." The apologies were meaningful because they came with changed behavior. Both children began treating me with consideration and respect, rather than the casual dismissiveness they had shown when they took my presence and support for granted. Perhaps the most satisfying aspect of our new relationship was discovering how to be a grandmother without being a financial sponsor or household manager. I could enjoy my grandchildren's company without feeling like I was being used for my resources. I took Madison to art museums and cultural events that enriched her understanding of the world. I taught Mason about real estate and business principles that would serve him well regardless of his ultimate career choice. I shared stories about their grandfather and family history that gave them context for their own lives. Most importantly, I modeled independence, self-respect, and financial responsibility. They saw me living in a beautiful home that I had earned through my own work. They watched me pursue business interests and social activities that brought me satisfaction. They learned that older adults could be vibrant, capable, and self-determined, rather than dependent and deferential. "Grandma, I want to be like you when I'm older," Madison said during one of our museum visits. "I want to have my own money and my own house and make my own decisions about how to live. Then you need to study hard, develop valuable skills, and never let anyone convince you that your preferences and comfort matter less than theirs," I replied. One of the unexpected outcomes of asserting my independence was renewed interest in business mentorship and legacy planning. Several young women in Charleston reached out to me for advice about real estate development and entrepreneurship. "Mrs. Whitmore, I heard you speak at the Women's Business Alliance meeting," said one young entrepreneur, Sarah Kim. "I'm interested in developing affordable housing projects, and I'd love to learn from your experience working with emerging." Developers reminded me how much knowledge I had accumulated and how valuable that knowledge could be to the next generation of businesswomen. I began considering ways to formalize my mentorship activities and possibly establish a foundation focused on women's entrepreneurship in real estate. The irony wasn't lost on me that while my own family had dismissed my expertise as outdated, other people recognized its current value and sought my guidance for their own projects. 6 months after selling my house, I received a phone call that provided the perfect capstone to my journey from exploitation to empowerment. "Eleanor, this is Robert Chen. I wanted to update you on the house you sold me. How are things going with the property?" "Beautifully. I've completed some renovations and updates, and I've just leased it to a family from New York who relocated here for business. They're paying $6,500 per month for a 3-year lease." I did the quick math. Robert was earning $78,000 annually from the property I had sold him, while Thomas and Jessica were struggling to afford $2,400 per month rent for a much smaller house in a less desirable neighborhood. "That's wonderful, Robert. I'm glad the property is being well maintained and appreciated." Eleanor, I also wanted to mention that the tenants specifically commented on the beautiful gardens and landscaping. They said it was clear that the previous owner had taken exceptional care of the property. After we hung up, I sat on my penthouse terrace and reflected on the transformation of the past year. I had gone from being taken for granted in my own home to living independently in a space designed entirely for my comfort. I had gone from funding other people's dreams to pursuing my own interests and goals. I had gone from being treated as a convenient resource to being respected as a successful businesswoman and valued family member. Most importantly, I had learned the difference between being generous and being exploited, between loving family and enabling bad behavior, between accommodating others and disappearing myself. The experience taught me several important lessons that I now share with other women who find themselves in similar situations. First, generosity should be a choice, not an expectation. When family members begin to assume that your support is an entitlement rather than a gift, the relationship has become unbalanced and potentially exploitative. Second, respect is not negotiable. Anyone who suggests that your comfort, preferences, and dignity should be compromised for their convenience is not acting in your best interest, regardless of their relationship to you. Third, financial independence is the foundation of personal independence. Having your own resources means having your own choices, and having your own choices means having your own power. Fourth, it's never too late to reclaim your life. At 70, I discovered that I could completely restructure my living situation, redefine my family relationships, and restart my business activities. Age doesn't mean accepting whatever treatment others choose to impose. Today, I live exactly as I choose to live. I wake up when I want to wake up, in a home that reflects my taste and preferences. I pursue business opportunities that interest me and social activities that bring me joy. I maintain relationships with family members who treat me with respect and distance myself from those who don't. Thomas and Jessica have learned to appreciate our relationship instead of taking it for granted. Madison and Mason are developing into thoughtful young adults who understand the difference between earning and expecting. And I have rediscovered the satisfaction of being Eleanor Whitmore, successful businesswoman, independent woman, and grandmother on my own terms, rather than someone else's convenient resource. The garage they wanted me to live in has been converted by Robert Chen into a beautiful studio apartment that rents for $1,800 per month to a young professional who considers it a luxury accommodation. The penthouse I chose for myself has harbor views, concierge services, and space for exactly one person to live exactly as she chooses. And the difference between those two options represents the difference between accepting what others think you deserve and demanding what you know you're worth. Sometimes, the best thing you can do for people who take you for granted is to stop being available to be taken for granted. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family members who exploit your generosity is to teach them the value of what they're losing, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do when someone suggests you belong in the garage is to show them exactly who owns the house. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're being taken for granted by people you love, if your generosity is being treated as obligation, if your comfort and dignity are being sacrificed for others' convenience, I want you to know that you have more power than you realize. You have the power to say no. You have the power to set boundaries. You have the power to prioritize your own well-being. And you have the power to walk away from any situation that doesn't serve your best interests, even if that situation involves family members you love. Love doesn't require you to accept mistreatment. Generosity doesn't require you to enable exploitation, and being a good mother or grandmother doesn't require you to disappear yourself for the comfort of others. You deserve to be treated with respect, consideration, and gratitude. You deserve to live in comfort and dignity. You deserve to make your own choices about your own life. And if the people in your life can't recognize and honor those basic truths, then maybe it's time for them to learn what life looks like without your presence and support. Trust me, the education will be worth more than any lesson you could ever try to teach them through words alone. What would you have done in Eleanor's situation? Have you ever been taken for granted by family members who expected you to sacrifice your own comfort for their convenience? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of reclaiming power and demanding respect resonated with you, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories of people who chose themselves when others wouldn't choose them.